Welcome to Rooted to Thrive, conversations to elevate our humanity. I'm your host, Rochelle Peterson-Ansari, Professor P for short. This is your podcast sanctuary for cultivating mindsets and skills to elevate our shared humanity. We're taking a deep dive into practical strategies to evolve as anti-racist, culturally competent, and inclusive individuals and leaders. In each episode, we're bringing you real-world examples and actionable takeaways. We're going to talk about personal growth, fostering connection, and creating positive change that dismantles systemic barriers and creates environments where all of us are valued, empowered, and activate our collective power. This is Rooted to Thrive. Welcome and welcome back to Rooted to Thrive. I'm Rochelle Peterson-Ansari, aka Professor P, your host. Today we're going to be continuing our conversations about how we elevate our humanity, but really focusing on being faithful to all. I'm excited about that. On this podcast, we're always discussing practical ways to become more open and receptive to human diversity in our personal lives, at work, and in our learning environments. And today, we have Dr. Teresa Nance, Dr. Teresa Nance, who I affectionately call, and many people call Terry. So you will hear me call her Terry throughout. She is retiring this month from 46 years of working at Villanova University. My hat's off to you. I have not stayed anywhere. I've been in higher ed for 36 years, but I have not stayed that long at one place. God bless you. And she is an expert in speech communications and rhetoric, has been a professor chair in the Department of Communication, and is well known and respected as an associate vice provost and chief diversity officer and vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, Terry and I connected when I joined Multicultural Affairs professionals in Pennsylvania in the mid-90s, right? So that's an office that's in student affairs in colleges and universities. And Terry had already been doing the work for many years. And we met through a collective of diversity officers and liaisons in the southeastern and central Pennsylvania area, right? And we were all working to support each other and our students. I personally have been inspired by how Terry has led and built structures that last at her institution. And from my perspective, she's been an example of how to do the work of achieving equity for members of your community while maintaining the dignity of our colleagues, especially our other decision makers. She's been a mentor for me and countless others. So Terry, I am honored to have you join me to talk about promoting equity, especially in faith-based institutions. How are you doing today?
I am doing just fine. And Rochelle, I am humbled by your introduction. I would say that I never considered myself doing anything special. I'm doing the work I was called to do.
Yes, doing the work that you are called to do. I love it. We are kindred spirits in that way. Being on purpose is important in this work.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, well, today's episode is called Faithful to All, Promoting Equity in Education, because you successfully collaborated within a faith-based educational institution.
Yes.
And you were able to create together, right, a variety of structures to help students achieve their goals.
Yes.
So before we dive into what some of those structures are and practical ways for others to create their own, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became involved in this work.
Well, Rochelle, I'm going to say that it started when I arrived at Villanova in 1978.
Mm. Okay.
Now, I will tell you, and it is, and I have said this publicly many times. I had no intention of staying.
Okay.
I have to say, I want you to think. I want you to think about what the world was like in 1978, what higher education was like in 1978, and for those of your listeners who knew Villanova in 1978, there were not a lot of people who looked like me doing what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I got there, looked around campus, and thought, Lord, did you make a mistake?
Mm.
What am I? Because my degree was in speech communication education, and what I wanted to do was I was actually to help students who were considered non-traditional students, and I wanted those non-traditional students to be able to access all of the riches of higher education. So
Okay.
here I am at Villanova. And at the time, I'd like to say it put the W in the PWI. And I looked around and thought, holy mackerel, what's going on? And as I am sitting there thinking, I'm here to teach my speech classes, and I am one of six. So my parents had put me through a lot of education, and it was time for my other brothers and sisters to start, their college degrees.
Yeah.
And so I said, let me get through this semester. And wouldn't you know, because God has a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there thinking, why am I here? Why am I here? Two Black young men,
Mm-hmm.
Stefan Roots and, oh my gosh, his name will come to me, Tracy
Okay.
Tan.
Okay.
Stefan and Tracy came into my office, and they were telling me that they had just reformed the Black organization. It was going to be called the Black Cultural Society.
Mm.
And here is the key, Rochelle. They said, we need you.
Mm.
Now I'm sitting there, I am fresh out of taking my courses. I had just passed my prelims. I was in the middle of writing, and I'm saying, you need me? And what they went on to explain to me is that I got them. They had talked to me for 10 minutes, and they said, you get us. You know what we're going through, and we need you to help us put this together. So I went through that, and I hope it wasn't too long, just to say, how did I get into this work?
Mm-hmm.
This work called me. I always say, I had no choice, because there was the discipline. And, when you're fresh out of your PhD program, you're all hot to share that knowledge.
Right.
But I realized that in order to share that knowledge, right,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure that all students, especially the students I cared most about, had the opportunity to access it as completely as they could. And again, it was interesting because Audre Lorde has that wonderful quotation about your voice and being powerful and forgetting that you're afraid. And so I never thought of myself as advocating for Terry Nance. But when it came to getting the students the resources that they deserved as a student organization, getting them the respect on campus so that their events could go off unimpeded, I found myself again and again in senior administrators' offices as an assistant, a new little instructor and then assistant professor, advocating. And remember, I hold no, again, now we may be up to 1980. I'm not holding any kind of office. I have no sort of title after my name saying DEI. And yet, if you think about it, what do we care about in DEI? We care about equity. We care about belonging. We care about inclusion. How can I, as a faculty member, I'm not just saying a Black faculty member, I'm going to say any faculty member, not be concerned about that? Come on. So it was a little bit of a strain in the beginning, but I have powerful colleagues who were outside of Villanova who served as mentors for me to help me negotiate what it meant to be a full-time academic, because even though I had certain white mentors at Villanova who were saying, just leave the students alone. Focus on your studies. Focus on your teaching. You don't have time for the students. Well, when these students were, and at the time, the diversity numbers were so low, in good conscience, I could not leave those students alone.
Yeah.
So I had to find a way. And one of the things that really helped me, and it took me a while to get there, because remember, I'm praying the whole time. And there were times, there were times I'm saying, God, you made a mistake. Is this Nineveh? Because I feel for our friends, I felt like Jonah, and I'm going, God, these people are hard-headed. This is Nineveh. You don't need me here. I need to be where they're going to listen to what I say. And every time, there would be a student, there would be an issue, and they would say, Dr. Nance, we need you to take care of this. And I go, okay.
Yeah.
All right, it's coming to me.
Yeah.
I may have been railing against it for a long time, but okay, God, I get it. I get it. This is where you want me to do my work. If you know anything about Augustine, I had learned about Augustine in my rhetorical studies, because he was a heck of a rhetorician. Because he didn't find God till he was 33. In fact, he had this wonderful prayer, oh God, please save me, just not yet. So, Augustine had a good life. He had a very good life. But he came to his understanding of God and his role in the world, not only through his mentor, St. Ambrose, but through being in a collective of young men who were all searching and seeking the truth. So it was through community, right? It was through engaging with one another that he came to find God. So that if you look at the Villanova seal, there are three words on it: unitas, veritas, caritas. Unity, truth, and love. And as you think about those three terms, and you think about what I was talking about before, my commitment to equity, inclusion, right? Belonging, equity. I mean, we're talking about truth, unity, and love. Those go together so beautifully.
Yes, they do.
The other thing that Augustine said that we're very fond of quoting at Villanova is, do not be comfortable with where you are. Your goal, and this is the important part, is to become what you are not yet. Rochelle,
say it again.
I read those words. I said, oh, goodness. I now have my line.
Yes.
Become what you are not yet. Now, I pair this with Catholic social teaching, right?
Yes. Okay.
Catholic social teaching doesn't say, we should think about the poor. The poor are deserving of some attention. Catholic social teaching says that we have a duty and a responsibility to have preferential treatment for the poor and the marginalized. By the time I am moving through the role of AVP, we're into the 2000s, early 2000s. And you know what? I'm helping students on the same doggone issues.
Yes.
We were bringing students to our campuses, giving them scholarships, and then say, I really hope you do well.
So access without support.
And here's the thing, Rochelle, there was support, but it was generalized support. I had a wonderful graduate student who I think you know, who came to some of those meetings, Christina Ruiz Mesa, who came with me into the Center for Multicultural Affairs as my graduate assistant, and we began doing some research. And what we found is that many of those kids who were sitting in my center had excellent high school credentials. Excellent. Then we looked at what was happening. They had a disastrous first or second semester at Villanova, and they had never recovered.
Mhm.
And Rochelle, that's literally what we did, is that there's a difference between being an academic advisor and providing retention services.
Mm.
As a
Okay.
retention counselor, you start with, are your bills paid?
Okay.
What's going on at home? Boyfriend, girlfriend, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
How's the roommate situation?
That's right.
Now I can ask about your studies, right? And before I ask, what are your grades? What's your relationship like with your teacher?
Mm-hmm.
Who are the tutors available? So in some ways, it sounds like I'm getting into people's business.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say, yeah, we did. Yeah, unapologetically.
That's right.
Because that's what we needed to do to get these students, because it wasn't just getting them to the finish line, because that's another data also
Mm-hmm.
became one of my good friends in this drive to change the structures of support.
Mm-hmm.
Villanova graduated students of color. But then when we went out and talked to those graduates, they did not like Villanova very much. Why? Because they had a terrible experience.
Yeah.
And my commitment at the time was, and you can ask any of my staff, this is what we said: we're going to recruit, retain, graduate, and graduate happy. Now, that was not graduate happy, but happy, satisfied that you were able to get everything that you could get from Villanova. So we had here's a blast from the past. Do you remember the Act 101 program?
I do, yes.
Yes. So we had an academic advancement program that my incredible predecessor, Dr. Ed Collymore, was very much associated with, started. And then Act 101 actually borrowed heavily from our AAP program. Okay. And so we did have Act 101, but that was a very narrow bandwidth of students, right. If you remember. They had to have certain economic as well as academic criteria. Right. And Villanova had recruited many more students of color who did not fit into that bandwidth. Mm-hmm. So we were able to start a second program called St. Thomas of Villanova Scholars Program, again, that identified these kids had these great backgrounds, who we, by our research, knew that they were going to have a tough time matriculating through Villanova successfully. We created this program where they got intense preparation. Mm-hmm. They were able to start a course, mm-hmm. take a half of a course, right, and then they would take the second half once the school year started. They were able to got intensive math, what we call thick reading, right? Mm-hmm. You can't give some kid who has never read a big novel, give them Socrates, give them Augustine to read and say, okay, what do you think? Yeah. So we did that over the summer in an intense class. Then we also were able, from that center, to create another office that dealt more with student life kind of functions, because students need programming. They need the kind of support that student life is going to give them. And then my office, which ultimately became the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which was really existing at the strategic level, where we were concerned about setting policies for the entire university, as well as a focus on faculty recruitment and retention. So that I think the point that I'm trying to make is that we start small. And I think anybody who has been engaged in this work knows you start with your own personal experience. And when you move from that personal experience, then you have to reach that soul searching. Is this the right place for me? Mm-hmm. And it was in that soul searching, literally soul searching, that I was able to connect with Villanova through some incredible people at the university. And that not just in campus ministry, but to find that there were people through the work of campus ministry, but there were people throughout the university who really understood this mission that we had. And it is a mission of inclusion. I don't doubt that many institutions, Catholic and otherwise, have good intentions related to their students of color, their students of difference. But I would ask your listeners to think about, well, what are the policies in place that either support those students or don't support them.
Right.
And let me give you a real quick example. Popular majors in any institution have the wonderful choice of being able to say, well, we have so many majors, we have to decide who we're going to take in. And many times they decide, well, we'll just take in students with the highest GPAs.
I just wanted to chime in that the equity, right, is looking at the experiences of these various groups, whether they were the poor Irish boys when the institution got started, to, more present day, and even, 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago, students who previously didn't have access to higher education, like students of color, that that is the equity, paying attention to their needs to give them resources they did not have.
That's right.
In order to have equal outcomes, right? Yes, right. That's the work that we're all trying to do. And I wanted to ask you a question, because I've worked in a couple of Catholic institutions too, and I always have thought about the connection to our mission, and know the history that often the institution it wasn't often, it was always, the institution was created for the poor and people primarily who were Irish or Italian, who were considered, well, as immigrants, right? They were not considered desirable citizens.
Rochelle, why don't we just say they weren't considered white? Let's be clear.
They weren't at that point, right?
No, they weren't.
They were new, right? So yeah, whiteness is a thing.
That's
separate
exactly right.
From and I actually shared this in a conversation in another episode, that it was when they became, we made people who were Italian, people who were Irish, white, when it served a cause in our society, right? So just there's a number of different groups that applies to. So it has been difficult for me to understand how people who work in institutions that were born out of struggle have a hard time connecting to that mission, right? Like connecting the services, the policies in that way. But I know, just like you and I, they also were groomed and conditioned and trained in schools, in workplaces, in this society that told them, oh, when you go to work, you create one thing that allegedly supports everyone. And what people don't realize, it are the people who they overlook because they didn't have experiences with them. Right? You said that, right? You didn't come in looking to work necessarily with the students of color, right? You felt called to it. You didn't feel like you had any particular experience that made you equipped to do that. Just like many other people who don't look like you, right? However, the need to support people who needed who had less resources coming into the space, the need was there. However, the people without, I guess, help to remember, without help to say, who are we missing, right? Or like the African proverb asks, how are the children? Right? If we don't ask the question, you're bound to overlook a whole number of people. You mentioned earlier that included in the people coming into your classroom, into your office, were students, white students.
Right.
from inner city parishes.
Yes.
And I would say inner city meaning that they were less well resourced as well, right?
Yes.
Like they
Yes.
were living in poverty
Hmm. Hmm.
or much closer to it than where the institution is located. And I just wanted to say that out loud because when you mention Lower Marion and Radnor, our listeners, somebody could be in another state for all I
Oh,
know,
that's
right?
true.
Right? Or another
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
They are more affluent, well
Right.
resourced because they're affluent school districts,
Yeah. And,
counties. Mhm.
and there was an interesting thing, I think, that I lived through. Villanova in 1978 is not Villanova in 2024.
Mhm.
In that time, we've become a doctoral institution. We have increased, we're in, these books of top 50, top 100, top whatever. And and that becomes important because that didn't just happen.
Right.
That was a strategic move. And I think part of what I wanted to say is that if you are doing the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you can't just rely on the goodness of your mission. You have to be strategic as well.
Yes.
You have to understand where the institution is going, and you have to be able to show the relevance of DEI to the growth of your institution.
Okay.
And so that as Villanova was growing in national prominence, it could not do that just relying on the same group of students that they had traditionally recruited.
Hmm.
So yes, there is the argument that it is right and just to recruit broadly and have a diverse student body, but there is also the business case that says you need these students of color in order to move the institution where it needs to be. So I wanted to make sure that I talked about that aligning the strategic mission of DEI with the strategic mission of the institution. And that can be higher ed, it could be secondary school, it could be elementary school. If you're not planning for the future, then
Right.
you're not doing your job.
Well,
And I think DEI needs to do that. And the second thing I wanted to say here is that, and what you were talking about is that there were people in the institution who weren't getting it. That's why I was so specific about saying advocacy. And I think a lot of us sometimes get frustrated that people don't get it, right? And that they say horrible, mean things, and they do. And however, we can't stop there, right? Advocacy means that someone is going to say something to you that may, quite frankly, work your last nerve. And what you need to do is you need to have in mind, what is your goal? What is it you want? For example, I will tell you, one of the things that I realized early on was that my students needed to have tutoring help beyond the tutoring help that the honors organizations gave. They needed professional kinds of tutors. And in order to get those tutors, you had to pay a lot of money. And remember, my students weren't coming from a lot of money. So I went to a Villanova administrator who I had been directed to, made my case saying, I need more money in my budget because I need to hire professional tutors. At which point this administrator looked at me and said, if your students need these kinds of tutors, do they really belong at Villanova?
how did I know what you were going to say? Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to say that there were a lot of things that came to my mind to say as a retort, but I had to stop, right? Because Rochelle, you may not know this. I was trained as a debater. I was a high school debater. I was a college debater. In my graduate degree, I coached debate. So I'm ready with 4 lines of analysis, right? I was ready to go out and talk about his mother. But I said, what is my goal here? My goal, I was kidding about the talk about his mother, by the way.
I
Just
know.
kidding. But just wanted to say that I had to think about, I have kids who need this money, need me to get this money, to get them the tutors they need. So that's when I had to slow my roll, go back through, go through and indeed, this is where I pulled up the mission argument. This is where I pulled up even the argument, we took these students in, we're taking their tuition dollars, we owe them the very best support that we can give them so that they can finish, right, their degrees. And we were able to come to an agreement, and I did get not only funds, I also got some additional graduate students to help.
But and that's important to sustain in this work, right?
Yes.
And so I wanted to go back. You said advocacy means remembering what your goal is.
Yes.
Right? And responding accordingly. When someone doesn't get it, remember at the center is your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it would help if you're developing relationships before you have these moments.
Oh, yes.
Right? Positive
relationships.
Yes. And then go through, find common ground, and then go through the conversation of change, which often goes back to what's the business case, what's the mission, right? Why are we all here? Mm-hmm. Yes. I just want to make sure that that's clear for everyone, as practical steps. And thank you for that example. There have been many who would walk away from that conversation, right? Where the person said to you, do they belong here? That person would walk away mad, angry, and then potentially go and have that cup of coffee with a couple of other, colleagues.
Like-minded friends, sure.
Right, like-minded friends, and then stew in that trigger and not actually get the students what they want. What they need, excuse me. Yeah. Right? Go ahead. You were going to say something?
I was just going to say, I was just thinking about the word that I wrote down as we began this interview is humanity. One of the toughest things in this work is to recognize the humanity of the people who oppose you.
Yes. Yes. It is tough work, but necessary.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yes. One of the things that I believe is a core value for me is connecting with and loving people who won't necessarily love me back.
Oh, heavens, yeah. Ooh, say that again. That is exactly right.
Yes. And it comes from a spiritual place, but it keeps me in the work. It sustains me because I wasn't promised that. And for some reason we think that, right? Like we think that everybody's going to love us. And that's probably like the greatest misunderstanding I think many humans have, that we're not going to go through some level of trial, tribulation, persecution for things that are worthy our attention. And most people that we encounter are going to be people who we have to help understand, particularly in societies that have at their core, right, the supremacy of different identities, right? Like it's in the US and many other countries, it's whiteness. That many countries, especially that have been colonized by Europeans, Western Europeans, experience that. We also believe in the superiority of our temporary able-bodiedness, right? Yes. It's temporary for all of us. Yet we have a history in the US, right? In many other countries as well, right? Where our people with disabilities were shut away.
Absolutely.
And while we are many decades from doing that, we still do it in the public discourse.
And we do it implicitly.
Yes, that's
right. And that's, and I think that very often as as people committed to diversity, have to pay attention to it. I suppose we get on other people's nerves when
Right.
we're always saying things like, I remember when I was in student life and they would say, oh, the senior social is going to be here. And I'm going, that's going to be really expensive, isn't it?
Yes.
You know,
Right. You're not thinking about people who, right.
yeah. Or
Working.
we have a practice with new faculty of somehow you don't get a paycheck in September, but you get a paycheck in October. Well,
You still have bills in September, right? And you started in August.
So those are the kinds of situations you have to go, this may not have been a problem before, but it's an issue now. And let's talk about it.
Yes, indeed.
So that I can always go with, I can go with the business reason, I can go with the organizational reason. And I think especially among people, and in any higher ed situation or any educational, you have your friends, you have your go-tos, right? And I have to say this, that as especially now that I'm looking in the rearview mirror, that more and more of my colleagues, and many of whom who don't look like me, when I look at the meetings that we have, the diversity meetings we had search advocates meetings, we have equity hiring meetings, and I look at them and my heart is so full, because so many of these young people, these young administrators who are in place now at Villanova get it. They know what the work is.
Yes.
And their hearts are on fire. That's another Villanova thing.
Okay.
To make it right. I believe that if I model that, other people will do it as well.
Yes. What I hear is a level of vulnerability as a leader.
Yes.
Yes. And unfortunately, our egos get in the way.
Oh, yes.
Many of us, right? I may not have that issue, say, in the workplace, right? As much as I might in my personal life. I'll be honest. When my partner says something, I might, recoil pretty, well, not recoil, but I'll be triggered.
I would recoil.
Around certain issues where my ego might be confronted. Yes. And I operate differently when I'm advocating for other people, though. Right. But I know that there are many leaders who are human, just like I am, who see that role, right? They see it as a role, and it has traditionally been that way, where you're supposed to be all-knowing. So they act like they know when they really don't, and it doesn't serve us well. Yes. I like to teach first-year students. I do. So I was teaching graduate students at first when I started teaching at Arcadia University in 2007, right? And loved that work because I was teaching people who were in service. They were teacher educator. So people who were already in the workforce. And I had students, I always did have students in courses that focused on social justice in some way, right? And I committed in those spaces that I knew I was going to draw a number of students of color, students who were LGBTQ plus, students who needed, right, us to have equity at the center.
Right.
And because I came from student affairs and started teaching, I was teaching part-time, right? So I was not a full-time faculty member. Because I was teaching, because I was coming into that space with that perspective of the whole student and their experience, we could talk about navigating, financial aid, navigating spaces on campus. It was just natural to me because that whole person came to class. Yes. And so when there was an issue in a residence hall one time, there was an issue where students were singing songs and using the N.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, white students were using the N word and black students
Mm,
confronted. Well, guess what? One of those times, one of the white students singing the song and one of the black students that overheard it were both students in my course.
uh-oh.
Yeah. Yes. And that was a trying experience
Sure.
because, well, one, was told to me by yet another student. And I brought it up because I felt like not on my watch. Like ooh, we don't have it, not that we didn't have the conflict occurred, no problem, but how we get through it
Absolutely. That's the key.
felt like it was my business.
Hmm.
Here we are struggling around, and interrogating these concepts in our class, and we are creating a community. How
Yes.
can I not make that my business? And by the way, like the student of color that was involved was upset with me because they didn't want to talk about it. You know, right? They didn't want to talk about it. But my thing was, I didn't want to put. Well, actually, I can't remember if I actually knew at first that one of the white students was someone in my class. Right? I think I
Mhm.
before it was complicated. So
Go
it
with
was
that.
complicated. But I remember the student after the conversation, the student of color was like, oh, wait a minute, but other students were affected by it. And everybody's talking about it. So
Oh,
I'm like,
yeah.
I'm gonna put the elephant in the room,
Absolutely.
right in this room. We're gonna talk about it so that we can heal from it.
That's
No
it.
how that conversation. So I was willing to be wrong. And yes,
Mhm.
it felt uncomfortable when the student came to me. But I actually, and when I reflected on it, I was actually kind of happy because I felt like a student felt like she could confront me.
That's right.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, she wasn't disrespectful. She just confronted me. And I was like, this was an exercise in us, you know, in us having conflict and moving through it as a community that cares about other human beings.
And that's the key, isn't it?
Exactly. And so I'm glad I had to be one of those people who, was confronted in the situation as well, even when I thought I was doing a good thing. Yes. And I dare say that I still was, although everybody didn't agree with how I went about it.
And you know what?
Right.
Isn't that the key? That
Yeah.
there's no one, you're not going to please everybody.
No, not at
But
all.
at the end of the day, you have to, I love the way you start off. We have to say, did I do the best I could to affirm the humanity of all of the people involved?
Yes. And what a wonderful note to end on. I want to thank you so much for your time, you sharing your expertise, sharing some real concrete ways people can put structures in place, larger institutions. What I also wanted to highlight is that when you talked about those retention counselors, right? And you said that was not traditional academic advising. The thought that I had was, yeah, but we can make that the new,
Mhm.
right? The new
Yes,
advising model. Like we just cannot leave people's whole lives out of the equation when we're talking to them about their career in academic development. Yes, right.
absolutely.
But what I also hear is that you put things in place for people to model for it to become institutionalized.
That's right.
Yes. So I thank you and all of those people who collaborated with you over the years, over decades to get to where the institution is now. Man, when you ring that final bell before when you leave that institution soon too.
Yes.
Goodness.
Yes. Yes.
You can,
You know,
yeah, I was just going
oh,
to say, you could really say how you really left a legacy. Mm, you left a legacy that you should very much be proud of.
well, I thank you for those kind words, Rochelle. And I will say again, I stand on the shoulders of
Mhm,
so many others. And
mhm.
I am proud to have those students standing on my shoulders
Yeah.
and knowing that I'm not done yet. I don't
That's
know
right.
what the Lord has in mind for me to do next, but I know that there's something out there I should be doing
Right. That's right. That's
to
right.
continue the
Excellent.
work.
That's right. Continue. So my very final question, if do you
Yes.
have any, like, I'll just say one resource that you might recommend to others for further learning? Just something that might come to mind that they can use to continue to elevate their humanity, to help them be faithful for all.
That is such a good question. And I really struggled with this. And you're going to laugh. And I don't know if you're going to laugh, but I'm going to, our friends at home can't see it. This is a book that's in my desk.
Mhm, mhm. Yes.
For our friends who can't see,
Yes.
I have the Bible.
Yeah. Okay.
And as Rochelle, I have
Yes.
all my bookmarks.
Mhm,
Um, I could give you technical books.
mhm.
I can tell you books that I have read, um, that and articles that have supported the notion of uh, Catholic teaching. But for me, I just it's the word.
Yes.
I just go back and as I said, I am at my work desk.
Mhm.
And that's the resource that I would pull up first
Yeah.
because sometimes I have to get right before I can go to the technical resource.
There you go. There you go. Right? Lean on your whatever your spiritual
Yes,
guide is.
that's it. That's it. You
To
have to go back to your center.
yes.
And
Yeah.
and I know where the purpose, I know where my goal came from. I know where my purpose came from. And that's the voice that I am most responsible to
Yeah.
and for.
Yes. And I'm going to
So,
be inclusive of our agnostics and our
yes,
atheists as well. You have a center as well,
yes,
right? We're not leaving anybody out, but
no,
I just believe and assume, right? This is a bold assumption that the majority of the people on this planet mean well to other humans. We,
yes,
we just need to release some of our own humanness, right? Like our ways of protecting our egos
mm-hmm.
so that we can protecting what we think we're supposed to look like among others so that we can really serve from our center. I,
That's
yeah, go ahead.
beautiful. So beautiful.
I appreciate you so much. And I want to thank everyone who listened today. Please leave a comment, share this episode, subscribe, just really engage with us. And I appreciate you all for taking the time to stop by Rooted to Thrive.